Today's guest is an accomplished angler for a variety of species, although he's probably best known for his time spent in the surf. He hails from New Bedford, Massachusetts, the largest commercial fishing port on the East Coast, so to say he grew up around fishing is an understatement. He skillfully fishes eels, plugs, and tins, and lets the conditions dictate his choices. His time standing on a rock in the dark has given him plenty of time to observe and think about how plugs and stripers interact with each other. His passion has led to lots of time in the water in all of the Northeast states. During the winter months, our guest spends his time in this workshop tinkering and building his exceptional Franktown plugs. He's on the pro staff at Lamaglass, Sims, Van Staal, and of course, Franktown plugs. And please welcome Frank Goncalves to the Saltwater Edge podcast. Welcome, man.
Thanks for having me.
We tried a while, and here we are.
We got together. It's been about a year.
Yeah, but it's been twice in 24 hours, too. I was at your talk last night, you know?
We're people.
So,
we're busy.
You know,
scheduling conflicts.
Yeah, well, there's a maybe that the kid will come in upstairs in a little bit, right?
Maybe.
Well, thanks for making the time. I do appreciate it. You know, I mentioned that we've been together twice in 24 hours because last night you spoke at a local club. And I was interested when you talked about your morning routine as a surfcaster. There's a variety of things. You might even do it a couple of times during the day. Can you take people through how it's all in the lead up to where and when you might go fishing, but I think it'd be helpful for people to hear the factors.
As a disclaimer, I check the conditions like 8 or 10 times a day.
Yeah.
However, I'm sure you've done that thing where you check the date or you check the time, but you never really process it. So you're like, hey, what's the date? Like I just checked it, but you
gotta look again.
So it's like you gotta look again. So you did it, but so at least 5 of those times are irrelevant. But yeah, usually almost the first thing I do when I wake up, besides as soon as I open my phone, I usually will check swell, and then I'll cross-reference that to tide charts, and I'll look at just the general weather conditions, and then since it changes so frequently, I kind of do that throughout the day. And as I do that, and when I'm working, I'm pretty much just scheming or game planning throughout the day. I'll have an initial idea what I want to do on the night, and then I keep checking, and it varies. And as it varies, I'll hone in an idea, and I build it up in my brain and build some confidence behind it, and I might think back on a few other years, and it's definitely, I do it all winter as well. Even when I'm not fishing, it's just out of habit. I'll check conditions.
Well, I've done, this is probably my 26th, 7th podcast, I think. I know it's over 25. And a lot of talk about current from people, less about tide, about how it's moving. And you're talking about swell. And you started your talk last night. Last night we were at the Newport Saltwater Club. Frank was the speaker, and I live in Newport, so I went over there, but I really thought it was interesting the way you started your talk talking about sea condition. Before it was like tackle or rigging or anything. It started with sea condition, A couple you listed were like the calm kind of day, the typical swells 1 to 3 feet, the sloppy night swells 3 to 5, and then big conditions would be swell 4 to 8. And you just talked this morning, you said your morning routine starts with checking out the swell. Why is that such a factor to you?
The swell will just dictate where I can fish. If it's 4 feet and you're swimming out to a pretty exposed set of rocks, it's probably not going to be a pleasant night, right? You're probably going to take a beating. It's almost worse if you know the fish are there. You got to compromise. You want to get rocked around or catch these fish. So I'll always start with swell as it really. You can have some wind and muscle it through a spot and through a night, but swell, you just take a beating. You just if you're getting tossed off a rock every other cast or every.
I got to toss off the rock story for later.
Great. I have a bunch of those. If you're getting tossed off every third set, it's you're not actively fishing, and then you're not paying attention either. You're trying to.
That's a good point.
You're not fishing really. You just is that a wall of water coming at me?
It's got you on guard.
And you're not focused at all. You're not. You don't even want to switch plugs because you don't want to get absolutely demolished when you open your plug bag.
Yeah.
So I generally look at swell. It really dictates. You can work with other conditions, but a big heave will really limit, especially when you're on any south facing, exposed from here all the way past where you are. Majority of places
I've never seen someone start with that. Although at that same club a month earlier, Jerry Audette was speaking, and he was talking about one of the first things he looks at is the how the water is interacting with the structure. And I do a talk at a lot of clubs around reading the water, but in a way, and as I thought about the way I think about things and then how you and Jerry seem to think about things, the structure I'm talking about is going to be in the same place. The rocks, the narrow river is going to be where the narrow river is, right? Yeah. So it's really not a variable. It's a constant. Yeah. And so the variable is the one you check 6 or 7 times a day, right?
It depends how you fishing too. If you're tucked back, I like to get on outer rocks, and then you're completely exposed. There's no rocks breaking, And
the outer rock is to fish as much of a drop off or a deeper area. Is that, because I see people go on a jetty and they'll go right to the end and throw as far as they can, right? But there's a lot of life and everything all along the jetty.
Absolutely.
So we are furthest rock. What do you think?
I like to believe I try to find like staging fish, like schools of them staged up, versus 1 or 2 here, like scouring around in between rocks. Like you're gonna catch them in there, and again, I'm hopefully gonna catch or try to catch larger fish, and then I just don't want any obstructions in my way. So if you have in the warmer months, sometimes they're not actively feeding, but you will find them on a decline or a slope, outside of the last rock and end of your cast. And it's relative. Some people, it's always said like distance doesn't matter. Sometimes it matters. So if I can, push out and swim out where I have no obstructions, and then only make half the cast you would have to make to get, that same distance from shore.
Right.
Now, if I can cast beyond the fish and bring my plug, eel, rig deal, whatever, soft plastic into those fish, I feel like I'm getting a way better presentation.
Yep.
And a lot of those habitats they like, or they're sticky. So if you have a large fish, it's a good chance to lose it if you tuck back.
Yeah, and also the idea of a good fish and obstructions between you and it. I think of I don't do a lot of surf casting, but I do, and I more often do it in the same couple of places because logistics and dark and all of it. It's just easier. I imagine you have a long list from a lot of times in different places, but the idea that I wish that the rock that's in the way now is going to stay in the way unless you do something about it, swim a little further.
Well, more so than ever, we have a lot of erosion too. So those rocks that are, used to be a stone throw, or we're not getting any shorter, but now they used to be chest deep. Now they're overhead high, just current and. It was a storm the night before last. That definitely did some damage. And then it was 2 weeks ago we had a giant storm. So I moseyed out to a routine spot I fish, and there's just more sand gone and along all those rocks.
Since those 2 storms? I have a similar situation, a beach that I grew up on basically. And every spring when I go take a look, there's another chunk out of the jetty or something's a little, that's that winter pounding. What'd you notice?
Local area. Well, I started noticing a few years ago, and I can dig up some photos to send you. Interesting. It's one spot, maybe 20 minutes away. There used to be a rock, and it was no higher. There's probably waist high, maybe belly button high. And I used to lay on it and relax a lot of the times in between tides. And there's a little divot up on the top, and I used to put a bottle of water there. Now that exact rock is overhead high, and I have a photo where I'm reaching up, and just a series of storms similar to the last couple of days and 2 weeks ago just plowed through over the winter, and I didn't go back on those storms just because I didn't think it would move much. And it just moved so much of it, and since it gave out a little bit during those storms, each little storm, it's just really vulnerable now. So each little storm is actually taking away from it. So a lot of the rocks that you would normally be able to swim to, there's just way too much current, and you're coming off the bottom for far too long that you would end up in the middle of the bay if you tried to get to them. And there's in that same area, there's a lot of home foundations too from early 1900s. And if you looked at a grid or a property line, if you're looking at a property line, you're like, it should be right here. No, it's actually just 40, 50 yards out into the water.
Yeah.
And it's about 8 feet of water. So that just shows you from even 80 years or so, 100 years, just those storms now, all the erosion from either current and then current and storms just slowly pulled it away. So now everything is much further out.
I like I said on that beach where I go. Okay. Okay, got it. In that beach I go, like I see every year. Some of the rocks that have been moved, it just kind of, since it's etched in there from my childhood, you're like, wow, this place has just been beat to hell. We talked about your morning routine, and then that you started your talk also with with the sea conditions and some of the different plugs for different sea conditions. And I thought it might be helpful to listeners, whether they're surf, fly, inshore guys, to maybe run through those conditions. Less about all the plugs, but you kind of had 4 of them, and you have some preferences. But maybe we could touch on those. Like you describe
I think I started them off in order from calm to your typical standard summer night here, which we tend to get. You're checking it's 8 knots of wind and 1 to 2 foot seas,
pretty
and based on the time of the month, and you can go into a whole other world of moon, barometric pressure, and then tides. I just left that out because everyone there is going to just fish their preference of tides. Or the guys who aren't, taking it so seriously, they're just going to fish at dark till 10:30, 11. They're not going to wait. Sometimes I'll wait till 11:30 to go out, and then you're not getting home till 4 a.m. And I'll fish the tide I want, no matter how late it gets. If it's good, I'll keep fishing it. I'll ride it into almost sunup, and takes away your sleep, but it's your choice. Whereas a lot of guys, they live by the quote unquote, I fish when I can, fish when you can fish. I prefer not. I'm going to fish all the time, so I'm going to try to hone in my hours.
Right.
But so I left tide out of it, and you can go into a whole world of barometric pressure, and it goes the same as spots and tides. But
that's all in your calculus you're doing in your morning routine.
So basically, I limited it to swell. I limited it wind, and
but those are pretty common when you describe them. I was like, damn, that's pretty. It's I know what you're describing in each case.
Yeah, a lot of guys, they have a spot and it fishes really well, and they'll go there, and if there's no fish there, they make a drastic move. If you have a smaller tide, a 2 foot tide, it's not moving much. It's not a minus tide, and it's off moon. It's not moving a lot of water around there. But you just look a mile up the beach, and there's a river mouth or there's an inlet. There's a good chance those fish came from that area. So just why not just migrate up there a little bit, as those fish aren't going to slide down as far. So kind of meet them in the middle, if you will.
Kobe was telling me a story in preparation for this, that there was a night you were on a sort of a half moon shaped beach, 2 nights of very good fishing. Yeah. And the third night wasn't so much, and you left and you got a text on the way home.
Oh, yes. I remember that. Yeah.
It looks like it's still smart.
He gives me he calls it BTE, big tide energy, because I like bigger tides.
Is that Kobe's term?
I think it started me. Hey, I'm gonna get out. It's a big tide. It's a big tide. It's a big tide. So
BTE.
As soon as he gets to any spot, he's like, "Oh, it's definitely BTE." I'm like, "What's that?" He's like, "Big tide energy." And he's just mocking me for always making sure I fish all the larger tides of the month.
But your point about that kind of that story we just told in the kind of calm thing is maybe it's time to go find someplace where there's at least more current or more food. Is that the other part of the inlet river idea?
Yeah,
when it's
sure.
Kind of
in colder water, any spot you're gonna any inlet's gonna be if it's not dredge, it's just gonna be deeper, right?
Yeah.
Any river mouth, any inlet. So and there's gonna be moving water. 5 miles of beach, if it's a small tide, there's not going to be much move. It's going to be pretty stagnant. And it's probably going to be 3 feet of water that's warmed up by the moon. So I'll try to move closer to not just structure, but to something drastic.
That changes
an island, a channel, something like that.
Do you kind of subscribe, or one of the things I describe in some of the talks I do is that the different species we chase, whether it's stripers we're talking about now, or albies, or bonefish or whatever, they have physical attributes that are their strengths, whether it's the lateral line and the power of the tail in the striped bass, for example. So there's times when their physical ability is their greatest advantage, right? Yeah. So like squid in the rips, the bass just go to town because they can, right? And the other fish are relatively powerless, right? So part of that, finding that move in water, might just turn the dial a click or two towards their advantage. And is that
feel
part
that way,
of the logic?
I feel that way if there's not much current or there's not much of a sweep and it is a smaller tide. I feel they know that, and it's as if you or I knew that the only place to eat around here was 4 miles away. You kind of stretch like your hunger a little bit, whereas if there's a place right across the street, or you had a car, then it's opens up all these options, and then you're like, oh, all right, I'm going to eat. Yeah. So I mentioned it last night in that talk. I'll finesse fish a little bit more when I don't feel as if they're as active, and I feel they're not as active.
An example of finesse fishing, what would you?
Yeah,
plastics.
Or a little more realistic stuff. I'll definitely key it on my retrieve. I mentioned it yesterday too. A lot of calm water spots. Yeah, I'm not. I've seen it firsthand. Fish aren't incredibly active, so you get a guy just flipping on and off his light. I think it makes a giant difference. I've experimented with it before. Just giant schools of, a big school of fish in front of me, and they're just eating everything, and I'm just turned on a bright light just to see, and it certainly does. Then your wax, and then the wax kind of just become non-existent, and then you shut off that light, and it takes about 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes for them to actually turn right back on again. So it definitely played a part in it, and I'm not one to just be yelling from rock to rock if it's super calm. I mean, they can hear that. They must be able to, even if you were underwater.
Right.
So yeah, I'll creep around a little bit more.
So finesse is not just
not
the
just
retrieve,
plugs,
the fishing, it's in the stealth
from the
and everything
retrieve
else.
to the plug to just my approach to it too.
Interesting. Moving to the next one, the typical. The swells 1 to 3, 5 to 12 knots of wind, a little bit better tide.
That's your typical. I think that's your typical. That's
spring, fall, but not.
If you have a whole month of that, you're certainly not complaining. You
Yeah.
didn't have giant heave or both great moons of the month. It's just your standard nights. I feel like those are the nights where you can experiment a little bit. You got a new plug similar. You found it at a show or a shop, and you want to throw it. You get 3 fish on what your confidence plug. Why not take out that plug when you're packing your bags? Be a little more creative. Take advantage of.
Yep.
I've always tried to do that. Things I never, had confidence in. When I know it's extremely good fishing, I'll try to bring 1 or 2 along, whether it's a tin or something that I'm not as good as, at catching on. I'll bring 1 along, and if I get 3, 4 fish and it seems to be easy, regardless of size of fish, I'll throw that on and see if I can catch to build my confidence.
Yeah, understand a little bit better.
So those easy, perfect conditions where you can throw almost everything, I just feel like you should take advantage of it. Because if you're catching 20 fish on the same plug, they're not large fish. You can move, maybe hope to find a bigger one and just fish them through and hope to catch a larger one as well. Or you can just make it fun by, hey, I never caught a fish on this plug. And then you start to gain confidence in that plug, how to fish it a little bit better. You're not so pigeonholed as you are in the larger conditions.
Where you
can only bring
just
giant
for distance
stuff.
or something like that. I got you. That makes sense. A lot of sense.
Keep it fun.
I'm noticing a handful of 5 plug bags over there.
Yeah.
Is there? How do you? I got the impression you pack per trip.
I do, yeah.
You don't have a boulder field bag or a spring bag. A lot of people would organize by time of year or by
I wrote something
structure.
recently about the same thing. It's just about being prepared. Same thing. I'm very really without whatever I need, and I don't bring much.
Yeah, I saw you had 2 tubes at the show last night. Is that what you typically fish, a 2-tube bag?
I generally bring 2 2-tube bags.
2 tubes. Okay.
And I do that just so I don't use the shoulder bag like most guys do. Everything's on my belt, and I'll bring an eel jug on my shoulder if I have anything on my shoulder, but it's much lighter. I just don't like casting with it and swimming with it. It's just a hazard. So 2 tubes allow them to bend around my waist versus a 3-tube. And then if I'm not fishing plugs, I can go to 2-tube and 1 single tube for 3 tubes, or I can just go down to a 2-tube or a 1-tube. But I'll pack every night, even if I'm going to fish the same spot and fish generally the same things. If I did well on a bone metal lip, I'm going to come down and I'm going to throw 2 more of those in my bag. I'll generally do that. So I'll make sure I have a backup to a backup, but I'll still pack it every single night and organize it, which I always think is, that guy next to you pulls out 140 plugs come attached to it like a daisy chain.
Like I said, I don't do as much surf casting maybe as I used to, but I do have a handful. I have mine more organized, a couple styles of plugs, from right to left in the bag.
I do as well.
But
I'm doing well.
Is there something that's in every bag? Is there something that's in every bag every night?
Yeah, there'll always be definitely at least a needlefish, a bottle plug, and a darter. I'll remove a bottle plug if I'm, if there's no wind and I'm not doing well on them at the time. But I'll always keep those, and then I'll start adding duplicates. If one plug's been fishing better the night before, and I'll go down to 1 needle, but I'll never go needleless, right? And so on. I'll do that, and there's almost if I might make a single tube if I'm going to get out before dark of top water plugs, but
is there a bucktail in there too?
I almost never not have bucktails.
Yeah, okay, I was going to say.
That style right there, and I'll just have 1.5 ounce, 2 ounce, maybe 3/4 of 1 ounce.
Okay, those are the ones I more often fish.
If I start doing well on those and I'm not catching on plugs, the next night I'll have 12 bucktails, and I'll ditch some plugs that completely are useless in the situation.
One of the things I see or think about when you describe what's always there, a pencil, or rather a needle, a darter, and a bucktail.
Yeah.
Because that's water column and a bit of profile too.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're covering bases.
Yep. I'll do always one metal lip too, something slamming something that's subsurface, because then you could bend your line tie, make it a surface plug, or bend it the other way,
Pretty
make
versatile.
it a much deeper swimming plug. I'll generally have more than one, but if I'm fishing eels, say they want eels, and I'm only bringing 2 tubes, I'll make sure I have one of each of those.
Yeah, and we've got video, but if people will be listening to this too. Can you do a simple explanation of the lip and the adjustment of it and the center line and things like that?
Yeah.
Because you talked about it last night. It was fascinating because you talked about a 1/16 of an inch, and I'm like,
so like it's relative. Some guys
you had a
go
good
higher.
analogy that helped.
It's just easier for a non-builder to just look at a plug, and if it's real sloppy, you probably don't want something with an extreme amount of wobble. So you're gonna look for something that's above center. And that
So if
plug
the lip is anchored in the plug above center,
there's a better chance of it went out with a higher lip slot. So the actual punch is on the higher right before the bend versus closer to where actually the lip bends.
Oh, okay. The distance between the line tie and the lip itself. The bend.
If it's higher, it's generally going to be a subsurface plug. So if it's snotty or if it's thick, I don't do as well. Just same as it would be with a top water plug. You gotta have those calm days, and you're not. They just don't seem to want to break the surface. But then you can throw a tandem rig sluggo and you catch, and it's just 2 feet underwater, but they're not really actively crushing stuff on top. They almost don't want to be exposed, if you will. So I'll always carry something that swims a little bit deeper. So for the non-builder or someone that's not, it's in tune with their plugs who doesn't know. It's an easy way to tell by something that's above center. And with the punch of the lip, the oblong punch there, where the line tie is higher on the actual lip, it's generally going to be something that swims subsurface. And if it's not, or it's not, you can still make it a surface plug by now bending that down, just the actual line tie, not the lip. But or you can bend it up and get it deeper. But I'll opt for that, especially if I'm only having one plug, because I can probably make it a surface plug under a very slow retrieve, or just subsurface, or I can make it a swimming plug.
So it's pretty versatile, and because I was just really fascinated last night when you were talking about how those little differences in where how the face of this plug, if you look at it head on, those little things it was a good tool for that, maybe better understand what it's going to do in the water, because at the end of the day, one of the other things surfcasters struggle with is wind, and certainly that's my experience, whether it's surf, fly, or inshore, with a spin rod like in a boat. The bow and the line is it's, you don't feel connected, you're not, but also what you described was that the plug itself isn't doing maybe what you think it's doing, because you're feeling.
It's not. You're feeling something, and you're just feeling the resistance of the wind blowing into your line, right? But ultimately, that plug is almost parallel with you. Parallel
like the body.
The front of your body is parallel with the side of its body.
You're looking at the side of the body.
And it's actually just going downwind. You feel that it's. You feel the resistance, but you're feeling it through a giant bow in the line. So that plug is actually, if it's just sideways to you, and you're reeling it and you're retrieving it. You're not bringing it in sideways, because now the bow in your line, the front of the bow is actually pulling on it, so it's coming this way, but it's not actively fishing. So if you're throwing that, 50, 60, 70 times, as long as you put a plug in front of a fish, you have a shot at catching fish, but you're not really actively fishing there.
Sure. So what's the answer? What are some things to do in that windy condition for?
I mentioned it
whether you're in
yesterday.
a boat or on the beach or whatever. What would you solve with that?
I mentioned it yesterday.
Good, you have something.
I mentioned it yesterday. Okay, in that situation, if you were stuck on a darty, you just find something with it. Now it's just now it just has a wider front. Now that will definitely grab more water, and now it's going to pull your line tighter at least.
I see.
You can just switch plug styles too to something that has a little more resistance, like a bottom plug or a middle lip. That's just a super straight parrot.
So what that one
and
is?
This one here is this is my bud Paul Moriarty's dart.
Oh, sure.
I fish these all the time.
Yeah.
And
but that nice and wide.
Now you can see that it's wider. Now you're going to grab more water and at least pull some of the bow out of your line.
Yeah.
There's a good chance you might have to switch plugs completely to something like a metal lip that thumps and has a lot of resistance, and you can visually see the bow come out of your line.
But that should be the objective,
and then
right?
even if
Because you're
this
not
was
connected
swimming,
otherwise.
and a fish hits it, by the time you set up on that fish, I mean, you're just reeling the bow out of your line. It has, all the time in the world to figure out it's an artificial and spit it or swim away. And there's no resistance there. So something with a wider front like that, something with a metal lip. That's
the answer to try to get the bow.
Yeah, I've been there before, but I've seen a ton of guys, and they're putting in everything into each retrieve, just slow retrieving it perfectly. They're doing everything as they would as if it was swimming, but it's really not swimming. It's just it's swimming down, like up tide, by a giant bow in the line.
Yeah. So to moving along to that sloppy night, which it sounded like you enjoy the most. Swell 3 to 5, winds 13 to 18, better tide. If the typical night was the night to experiment, it sounded to me like the sloppy night.
The sloppy night's just not a giant night, right? It's not. You're just taking that absolute beating. Water's going to most likely be dirtier. You're not going to be able to maybe fish where you want to fish, and you can still kind of cast where you want, right?
Yeah, the wind is a factor, but not taking.
I like that. I like a disturbance. I feel like larger fish will be a little less cautious about coming in tight, a little less cautious about coming back twice and hitting your plug. A little more, aggressive maybe. Maybe they're going to just put on the feed, and you can still act like you can still productively fish. And I like to, say you sprinkle casting. You're, casting here.
Yeah.
Once you get any larger than that, over 18 knots, then you kind of pigeonhole the casting with the wind or. One direction directly into the wind. Now it's going to kill your cast, and now you get the disturbance, but you're not having nearly unfishable conditions.
To me, that sloppy night is that physical advantage of being able to, track things with their lateral line and the power to get there. Story from right beside that jetty I was talking about earlier. I might have been, 10 or 12, and I had one of those little creek chub poppers. Right, it's totally silver. Okay. And, the wind and all this was a mess and I couldn't fish. Right. But it was whitewater where the jetty and the rock meets the beach. And I just sort of tossed the thing in there in a half-assed way, cranked it twice, and a, 18-inch, not, 20-inch striper jumped on it. And I was just at my, 10 years old or whatever, I was just stunned that he could find it.
Yeah.
Stunned. And navigate in water that I wouldn't, I'd get tossed on the rocks if I was swimming.
I always feel like they're looking, So even in whitewash, if they can find silver sides in whitewash, there's a good chance they're going to find a
plug,
a reasonable sized plug, right?
Yeah.
And
it was this particular one was just all chrome. You know what I mean? I'm like, it's all to the human.
It's always been the number one plug I've ever found on a beach was like a chrome creek chub.
Yeah.
And it never has hardware. Yeah, I feel like friends always find really nice plugs on the beach. I've never found anything. Except the only other one is the other creek chub with the green head and the cream back.
Yeah,
that's the only two plugs I've ever found. I've never had much luck finding them.
The chrome one is like I said. What it was about where he could navigate could navigate and find the thing, locate it in this whitewash, but also the fact that at least the human perceives that chrome is just reflecting what's around it when that's not what's happening in the water. There's a density there.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. So it casts a silhouette for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure they see the chrome at all.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting
a
at.
contrast. Yeah. So I've always said that where folks go darker plugs and darker nights, I stick by that, or I'll start that way. If this room is completely dark right now and there's something black over there, you have a better chance of your eyes seeing it than white, and same thing with something white in a really bright room, right?
Yeah.
So it just gives you you're just going to see the outline, but it's going to provide a little more contrast. So same thing in the wash. I've done that where I've tried to look up at plugs in the water from underwater, and once you have a little bit of murkiness from any sort of surf or whitewash, the colors are relevant, but the tone of what it is, if you're just going on they say it's black and white, now it's 10%, it's just going to provide more contrast. So I think the chrome's actually good in that sense, But I feel like they gravitate towards that wash too, so they're going to follow that wash line looking for something. Versus if you're out
any aspect of your graphic design and all the stuff you must have to do with color in your profession apply?
That'd be my dream job. I just want to work at a paint store or something, like mixing paint. I like color. And it's bizarre. My eyesight's just going from looking at a computer all day to staring into a black wall of night every night. I can hardly see. However, almost anything I make, I like colors, and I like kind of pairing colors. But so I do the same thing with plugs. You know, I kind of like a simple, clean job, and some of it goes through. Every plug I ever made, I kind of drew multiple times at work just because I was there. So if I sent out the file, like years back, it's how I started, so I never changed. Every plug is, I think they're almost in that binder there. So I can show you after. Every plug I ever made, I kind of freehand drew on a computer, just in design on the side of whatever project I was working on. So if it was for a city poster on the side, I'd be, you know, kind of outlining plugs and give me a rough shape. And then by the time I actually got to turning on a wood lathe, I kind of already had the, you know, its lines, if you will, already kind of pre-made in my brain. And then to try to get it to swim was...
you know, in each of the disciplines, whether it's surf, fly, or inshore, there is, you know,
a profession that's tied into...
Yeah, well, no, but how far you can take it, you know, the colors of whether that's sandy olive or silverside olive, you know, I mean, it's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
But you said, and I noticed in your plugs,
too. I think they matter, and if they don't matter, they matter to me. So
right.
A clean shaped plug, and you know, a color that's just
you talk about
chef's kisses.
Like when it that finesse fishing, you're going to be a little bit more realistic. That's when your paint job might be more of a factor, or putting eyes on a plug or something like that compared to in some of the bigger, darker spots.
Grabbing a nicely painted bomber with eyes, profile that mimics most of the bait in the water is probably going to be productive than a big old white beat up Danny. Maybe not, but if it works out in your brain, there's a good chance it's going to translate to you have more confidence in catching fish on it, right?
Yeah, so they might recognize that there's something out there that could be food. They can't see it, but as it gets closer, if the conditions are right, then the visual has to match up too, right?
Yeah,
the profile and ultimately the color.
Like, say the color doesn't matter. You can have a parrot colored plug, and it could just be beat to a pulp. Almost no paint on it, hook rash everywhere, epoxy's chipping, paint's chipping, and it's still going to catch as well as a brand new one. But why not just start out with if you're going to put in all the work of going fishing, or even building a plug, why not just make it as nice as you can. I know, and most guys do know, that almost just a plain wood plug that's not painted or a rattle can with a spray can will most likely work. But you can start off with it, giving you a little boost of confidence, and you looking at it and be like, "Hey, I like this."
Yes,
why not?
Yep. One of the things that you said, and I would say in that 26/7 podcast that I've done, and it's I'm very fortunate I get to choose the people I want to talk to, and in the different aspects of fishing. But they use the word presentation every time. So whether it's it's not a retrieve, it's not you're not casting to a target. Every cast kind of has a purpose, and there's a presentation to it. Something you're trying to show, either a side of the profile of the plug, or it appears where they think it should be, or you're really trying to paint a rock. Is that how you see it yourself? That it's do you have a fish in your mind? It sounded like, I'll go backwards a little bit, sorry, but when you do your morning routine, it's just you getting started to figure out where that fish is going to be. The one you're thinking about tonight. And you're fishing for him.
There's a good chance I went the night before, so I have an idea of what I want to do. But and I'll kind of form it in my head. And a lot of times I go and I'm disappointed. Like it's not, and either the conditions are completely off, or there's just no fish there. And I mentioned it last night. The most important thing is to get your fish in front, your plugs in front of fish. Yeah. The guy who's just you could have all the nicest plugs, whatever is popular on the internet. You could have some of the best swimming plugs ever. But if you're just walking down the end of your street, because you live near the water and you just don't feel like traveling, it's really not going to help you.
Right. Until the day they're there, and then you'll be successful. Sure. That's your point, right?
But if you really want to put together something, if I'm going to spend any time, I'm going to just do the best thing I can. The best I can. Put together a full package. From my tackle being right to being where I'd want to be, where conditions dictate, and going to bring what I hope fish want to eat. But if I'm going to put in 10%, I'm going to put in 100. When you think about different pieces of structure, there's certainly different baits that are more prevalent in like boulder fields than there is on sand. Different ones on sand than there might be in an estuary, right? And you think about sea bass and tautog and that kind of stuff. Do you think about, as you think about presentation, you think about the bait you're trying to imitate, or
and it doesn't have to be 100% of one or the other, or is your attitude, hey, they're opportunistic feeders. I show them something that looks alive,
Yep.
and doesn't like offend them in some way, like crazy color or something like that, or that they're going to eat it because they're opportunistic feeders.
Sure.
Is it one camp or the other, or is it depends?
I think it's spot dependent, right? Yeah. And sometimes more so than that, I would think it's not even profile or shape or size to match the hatch, if you will. But say it's sea bass, I feel like you're better off, or tautog, baby choggies, and you're fishing some ledge rock, right?
Yeah.
You're better off trying to get something that's going to skim the bottom. Adam Jr. with a bent up lip, and now you're bringing that plug 6 feet down in 7 feet of water. Versus how many little black sea bass do you see cruising the surface at night? So. Yeah. A surface swimming plug's probably not going to be best. So regardless of color, again, I just think they might just see the contrast from the distance before they attack it, or actually, really charge and hit a plug. So I think being in the water column that said bait's going to be in is actually more important than, So if you think there's sea bass in the area, you can have a sea bass painted plug, but if you're skimming that across the surface, I think getting down to where a sea bass would be, or a baby tautog, is a much better idea than. Making sure your paint job.
So it's back to the water column, covering the water column to present.
If you're in the wheelhouse of the profile of it and the size of, if it's all, short sea bass or it's scup or what have you, I think you're just better off being in the water column that bait is in, especially if you're over 8 feet of water. If you're in 2 feet of water, being a foot down,
you can't go below it anyway.
You can. I wouldn't go into 12 feet of water, and if there's sea bass, be throwing a surface plug. I'd try to be in the wheelhouse of. So I care more about bait. A lot of the schools of fish I find, they show up year after year. They're just staging fish.
It's true. So you said that earlier.
They're not eating. They're pulling up. They slide out of river mouth, and you can almost dictate what part of the tide they're going to end up there. And I've snorkeled a lot of these spots. There's nothing there. Everything I thought was there isn't there. And I've covered all of it, and I've even surfaced a bunch. And is this really? Am I here? And I've covered all the area, and there's nothing. You just get a slow incline. So maybe that incline is just where it breaks some of the current. So they all pull up there, and I think they break each other's current, kind of like a cyclist. It's just kind of a pit stop for them. So they're not actively feeding, but if you put a plug or a rig deal right on top of their head and bring it into them, you're just going to get large fish after large fish. But they're not scouring or eating. I think they're just tailing. And they're just
hanging out.
Yeah, they pull into these little kind of bus stops, if you will.
Yeah.
And if you find one of those, and those are usually just out in a little bit deeper water.
Right.
So it crosses earlier, just getting out a little bit deeper, swimming out.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of those fish, because it's year after year on the same tides and the same conditions, and you almost never see bait. Now there could be baby lobsters, there could be stuff like that. But you could just be intervening them, and as long as they keep showing up, you'll just keep going back. So if I feel like bait, depending on bait, I'll try to match a hatch a little bit more. But if I'm just staging fish, which I do like to fish, because usually if you find one, you're going to find you're going to find 30 or 40. Yeah. And if it feels like the larger they are, the less there are of them. It might be only 12, but they're going to be absolute slammers.
Yeah.
So if I have a few tides every year where I'm running to those schools, and it doesn't really matter. You're almost better with whatever you can hook them the best with, and whatever you can get in front of them and bring into them versus, trying to match trying to match a herring.
I'm just realizing, Frank, that you don't. I don't fish for the fish you fish for.
Yeah,
that's what that is. Because I think of more of the feeding scenario. Like I want to see the wave recede, and the bigger wave in the set, and flush out a spot, and that's a time to have a plug in there or a fly in there or whatever. But it's where the fish would expect to see it. But that fish is already there to feed. Your point versus the ones you're talking about might be staging in a little bit of a place that's a little chill or whatever, a little bit less.
You can't fish. I like both. I guess that's what brings.
I'm not
back.
saying no to you, but I'm saying for me, I think I'm probably more focused on the where I see that physical advantage and the white water. That's what my eye sees as a place to focus, and I can see you're fishing for different fish.
I think I said it last night. I like being right. Ultimately, that's my, I like putting together a little game plan, and I like when it pans out.
Yeah.
The fishing is just a bonus, or catching fish is just a bonus. I kind of like scheming, if you will. But I feel like I said this a couple times before to Buds. I feel like years back, this is even his earlier edge days. There's just more fish, especially Rhode Island. A lot of our resident fish moved north, so a lot of people have just gone into the sport the last couple of years. It was easier to learn stuff back then because there was an abundance of resident fish.
More feedback.
So you can kind of, if you were fishing on the outskirts of one of those schools of staging fish I talked about, you're still going to catch. Nowadays, if you're not on that school, you swim out to that rock, make that particular cast, you're almost not going to be, catching. But back then, there were so many resident fish. Now on the outskirts, you can be catching 15-pound fish. And then one day, you just decide to move up 30 feet, and then all of a sudden you're catching twice as many 18 to 24-pound fish. And then you move up a little further. So there's more fish to kind of bring you to ultimately where the bulk of it is. The bulk of the action is happening. Now it just seems isolated groups of fish, and if you're not in them, you're not doing well. So it's a lot harder to learn when there's less fish to be catching.
Give you feedback.
To give you feedback to kind of move,
That's valid. I think
get progressive on a bite, or it's a little harder to learn now, I guess.
I think so certainly when striped bass had its original resurgence, it was abundance, and it was just different, and it's tougher.
And it could be just as good, but it would just take a whole other set of decade or 20 years to learn again. It could just be in spots that you would never think. And I see it all the time. People I've run into, and they blurt out where they're fishing and where they're catching, and I'm like, well, I used to fish that place religiously every day, and it never actually produced when there was a lot of fish. So it could be just not. I feel like there's less resident fish, but a lot of spots that might not be productive that you completely eliminated from your brain if you fished it a lot,
without
when it was really
success,
good is now an active productive spot.
Yeah.
But you've just
I'm not going
you
there.
just never you'd have to be paid to waste a night at a spot that's done so well for you over the years.
Yeah.
But there was just a little more resident fish that can string you along to put pieces together to a bigger puzzle, and that's how you land on that mother load, if you will.
Yeah.
Now it just seems if you're not on the mother load, you just kind of like throw into desolate water. Now it could be the same amount of fish, and they could just move. There's so much area to cover in a single night, and you're not, we don't have 360. You're not like riding the shoreline with a sonar. You're side imaging. So it really just takes footwork. And you're going to do something that's produced for you for the last 4 seasons, even if you're a new angler, or 20 to go explore. And I've been trying to do that the last couple seasons. Every time I'm not doing well, I'll I won't necessarily pick an old spot that didn't produce, just because I've.
But you've got. So you're not getting you had this thing schemed up in your head, and it's not coming together on a night. When do you pull the plug? I've heard you say earlier you don't make a big change.
No, I'll make. I can beat a dead horse. I've said that before. I can.
What a great expression.
Don't take no for an answer. Sometimes it's It's like I'll go into encore. I'll start fishing out like the opposite tide than I fish. But a lot of times when I scheme, I'm a little bit crazy on that. And when I'm scheming in the morning, I actually have a second, third, and fourth option in my head.
Yeah.
So if that second option is really weighing on me and I have to know, I'll when I'm certain that nothing's going to happen, I'll leave and I'll go to I'll always.
But I think the hanging in there is an attribute to be a successful surfcaster, right? But at some point, you got to make a move too.
I basically fish until the water stops moving. And again, I'll try to move on slack tide, and I'll fish harder when I'm not doing well than when I'm doing well. Mm-hmm. When I'm doing well, I kind of go, and I'll catch fish, and if I don't feel like it's going to be a large fish, I'm content for the night, right? Mm-hmm. But when I'm doing bad, I actually fish way more than when I'm doing well. So I'll actually, if I don't catch, I'll actually go to another spot where I went to a spot and I only caught a few fish, and I was hoping for a large fish. I can still settle on a few fish, come home, get a few hours of sleep. Yeah. Whereas if I'm doing poorly, I almost can't take no for an answer. So I'll go and I'll go right till sunup. It's
does every cast?
I only regret it the next day when I'm working.
Yeah. Well, I was curious about this. In a way, does every cast have a purpose for you? I mean, because I think everyone can get, at least me. I know it's true of me, and I believe it's kind of human to kind of get in a routine, and you're doing things, and you're putting in the time, but maybe not as thoughtfully. Do you feel like every cast kind of has a purpose, or do you find yourself like, oh, it's almost like driving home and like, how'd I get here?
Yeah, I still to this day I talk every cast too. So
to yourself,
completely by myself. I'm like, ooh, that's the one. Like, all right, yeah.
That's so good.
I still, after all these years, I still love fishing, and that's why I never want to
lose that.
Like, I do some field testing and stuff, but I never really want something in the industry, because I feel like people who work in the industry, like, they lose their like luster for fishing. I still love it just as much as I did when I started 20 years ago. I still like if a fish hits, come back, like I'll talk to you. So if
we were talking earlier about me trying to get better at bucktails, and I had this feeling that the thing's finally swimming and sweeping more like you might fish for trout with a streamer or steelhead. It had side pressure. It was moving. And it's something I was familiar with, and I felt good about it. And I thought to myself, well, this thing's sexy. And 2 seconds later, I was tight. But I was talking to myself, like you say. I think that's great.
If there's ever dialogue it'd be pretty interesting.
Oh, you should just mic
up. I've
up.
done that before. I've looked at like a swinging bucktail. I've said those exact words. Oh, that's sexy.
Yeah.
So if there was ever, whether I say it in my head or slightly out loud, even if someone's fishing with me, most likely they're not close enough to hear. But I'll generally talk even if I'm completely alone.
But that confidence, I think, I don't know if it gets all the way out to the plug, but it makes a difference. So a couple things. One of the things I heard you say, and I want to make sure I got it right, was you were talking about rigging in these conditions, and you're saying how on that sloppy night, where the wind's up, 13 to 18, kind of definitely more than the more typical night, you might drop your braid from maybe 65 to 40 in leader, or 50 to
55, but I'll back off.
Take it down for distance.
Yes, I'll have I don't normally do this, but I can put on a spool of 40 and remove some of that bow. You'd be surprised.
Because the profile of it.
Just it being thinner, you're not gonna. It's not gonna remove all the bow.
Yeah,
I'll do the same thing with my leader, and you're also going to cast a little bit further, right?
The jig guy does the same thing when the current's moving.
Well, basically it'd be the same thing
better.
as if you're on a boat, like you would scope out.
Yeah, exactly.
So it'd be the same thing. You're just trying to remove it. So if I can, and that's kind of the point I was touching on yesterday, was you're going to be actively fishing to catch. It's,
right. That sideways plug with the big bow isn't it?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how
long you spend.
Right. So if you're not actively fishing and your plug's not doing what it should, it doesn't matter what you do. So if I can back off and I swap out my spool for a 10-pound less, again, it's going to give you a 10%, 20% difference, but it adds up.
Might be the difference. Yeah.
So it adds up with changing your plug and just doing the little things, I guess.
You mentioned to me, and I was like, that's, genius, if you will, that you do a bunch of leaders all winter with a clip, and so you only have one knot to tie on the rock, right? And they're at a set distance.
And it's standard leaders right there. So from the end of that table, and then eel leader, standard leader. That's a long leader. And then these are 3 wires. So everyone gets pulled there and it ends there. So it's 48 inches. Yeah. And then that's a long leader just for a few sticky spots I fish.
But that'll help you. Just because it's just everything's familiar.
So you don't
have to look.
Folks,
you know where you are.
Folks reel on their swivel. I'll take a second to actually have to look at it. Generally, I know where the plug is swinging in relation to my chest when I lift my rod. That is, I'm going to have 2 or 3 inches before my swivel goes through my tip top. So I keep every leader exactly the same distance.
Yeah.
So little things. It's little victories. You and I were bit talking, of an edge.
Yeah. We were talking in the shop. This is 3 or 4 years ago when you said that, and I went like. That's a good one, because it takes an unknown away. Turns a variable into something that's known.
Yeah, and I feel like if you can control all those little things,
exactly.
It's just like the guy that gets there and he's honking on his drag, like all that's done. Like as soon as I suit up or as soon as I leave my house, everything is done. Mm-hmm. Doing all that stuff later, then you're still just. Like that bow in your line, you're not actively fishing. Yeah. So I like to be, as soon as I'm in the water, I'm just actively
make it
fishing.
Happen.
Yeah. I'm not sitting there untangling plugs, or I keep leaders just organized, and I just subconsciously get one. I never quite understood the guys who bring a spool of fluorocarbon or a spool of leader material and they have it on their bag, you're going to make that whole shebang there. I just do it here,
No, I took you up on it. I've been doing it that way.
Right? Pre-tied leaders is the way to go.
Yep. And you talk about fluoro for abrasion resistance mostly. Was that the reason? Oh, stretch, lack of stretch.
Yeah, lack of stretch. Someone asked me yesterday about VMC hooks or 4-aughts versus 3-aughts and 6X versus 4X. And once I started going up to 6X hooks, they're just a much thicker gauge wire.
Right.
So when you start to get into like larger fish with a thicker jaw, it's really hard to penetrate that. So especially more so when you have a parabolic rod, because now it's just going to give. And now if you have a 48-inch leader of 60-pound mono, by the time that stretches, that fish, if it's not penetrated, if it hasn't, it can just spit the plug or it's probably going to shake loose with a couple head shakes. So I switched over to fluoro maybe 3 or 4 seasons ago. So I use 60-pound fluoro, but it's not for any sort of visibility advantage. I just use it as a zero stretch. So I feel like I can feel every hit. I can feel everything my plug's doing. And then I can certainly, a hook will bury much more as once my rod bends, now there's no stretch. Whereas my rod would bend normally, say there was a little bow in your line from a little bit of like headwind. Now you got to remove the bow out of your line. Then the stretch of the mono, that fish is long gone.
So the attribute is fluorocarbon's harder, so it makes it more abrasion resistant. It's tougher to tie knots in the bigger sizes.
It's miserable. I use 60 in it, so it takes a lot more. I mean, if I go back and tie a mono leader, I wish it was that easy.
It's softer. It seats. But the other thing about stretch is that mono is self-elastic, so it makes it great for big game leader, tuna and stuff. And fluoro will stretch, but only once. No, it does. So what it doesn't do is come back, and that's what mono does. Mono is in fact elastic,
retracts.
So it makes all the sense in the world what you just described. But
and if you fished a stouter, faster action rod, it's fine. I like a little more of a noodly rod.
Too.
So I feel like by time if you have smaller fish, I don't think it matters as much. And it didn't matter with 4X hooks because they're a little more wiry, a little more needle-like, a little more needle point. When you get into a thicker gauge hook and a bigger fish, I feel like you're going to drop a lot less if you can bury that hook. Sooner than later, if it.
One of the things I wanted to clarify something because, like I said, you gave a presentation last night. One of the notes I wrote is it sounded like when the water's starting to get dirty, snotty water, just dirty. Is that more towards the top of the water column and below is clean, or is the whole column kind of dirty usually? What's your experience there? Because I was clarifying something you said. I don't need to make you have an opinion on it, or maybe I heard you wrong.
And again, it will vary by wherever you fish. But, and that's again why I mentioned mentioning hide a little bit. You kind of hide and you tuck back into an inlet, if you will. You're gonna have a little more water movement there, so it's gonna cycle through it. And but if you're in this place where there's a lot of bubbleweed and it's crashing on the bubbleweed, it's a good chance it's gonna rip out a lot of that. So I'll try to fish anything over 6 feet. So if they're actively feeding up in the slop of it, sure. But if I have to get below it, I can't. I'm not going to generally stay in 3 feet of just white water. Where some sand beach guys would. So it is relevant to where you fish.
So, I spent a lot of time with a good buddy of yours, Kobe, and I've got 4 or 5 stories. We're not going to do them all.
I get stories.
But I know you have a rock that you guys share, and then there was a day where you landed a bass on this rock. You guys were side by side, and then the other look at you, and somehow the hook got into his boot, and he fell off the rock. And then, so do you want to play that one back? Or what would you do differently next time?
I think it's the same story. It was, he'd gotten hooked, and then I forgot who went off.
I think he described he was in the water.
So he went off the back of the rock.
But he had the bass.
And a swell knocked him off the back of the rock. And it's just one of those places that fish is better when it's big. And then I think I helped him up. So I grabbed him, and then there's swell coming, and I helped him up the rock. But when he came up, I was pulling so hard, he just let go of me. So then I went off the deep end of the rock. So instead of he just didn't care that. So I put all my leverage into pulling him. And I think we might have locked. Bigger than you. We might have locked like this. So I did it, and he was just like, "Oh, thanks," and let me go. So then I just went poof, just underwater off in front of it, and then the swell pushed me over it. But he also, I mentioned this when I was thinking about this when I was talking about leaders, he he ties a leader or two. He doesn't pre-tie. He's not very prepared, and he just takes off his hat and he sticks him in there. So I'll coil up and he puts his hat back on. So a spy, he normally just asks me for a leader. So he's just like, he knows he's going fishing, every day. And then he's like, hey, can I borrow a leader? I'm like, you don't have a leader? So I always give him a leader, a nicely tied one. And then when he does need one, he pulls off his hat, and then there's just a coiled mess in there of leaders. And then I asked him if he wanted some little Ziploc bags to have pre-tie leaders, and he's like, oh, they're bad for the planet. I'm like, all right.
And I know he gave you some bad advice to take the whaler. And
that was
so he lives
one
in
of the
Westport, right?
times.
And has a little whaler, but no electronics.
The electronics are terrible, and there was actually no running lights. There's a stern light. So it's an 18-foot whaler Montauk, and I used to take it from his parents' house over up the river and across the Cutty Hunk to go fish with him during the week. And then
that's why he's living over there.
He was living there, and then so I used to come back in the morning so I can get back for work. If you jived with the ferry, I wouldn't get back in time for work, and there wasn't a ferry that left late enough in the evening for me to go. So I'd take the whaler, and he'd always do that thing. It's like, dude, you got to get out here. It's very good, and I can't say no, And so it's me and my bud Mike. We decided we looked out. It was pretty foggy, and we decided we're like, all right, we're gonna do it. So we went up the river and we came out to the mouth of the river, and you could barely. The river's not that wide, and you could barely see either side. There's probably maybe 20 yards visibility, and it was just the fishing was so good. It was just getting nighttime, and we took the whaler from the mouth of the river over to Cutty Hunk, and we did this pretty often, but this particular night it was just pea soup fog, and I think I just had Navionics on my phone.
Oh, was that what you were using?
And the Garmin it's not worth it. And then I think right before he told me about this situation, because the scariest part's crossing the shipping channel. So once you pass Hens and Chickens, you go across the shipping channel, across the bay, and then there's actually every part of it's scary. We just could see nothing for an hour. He was saying
he was at the other end, and you should have arrived.
Yeah,
it was a long delay before you actually showed up.
So
he was over the moon when you two guys appeared.
So when we arrived, it was just getting dark, and there's so few people on the island at the time. He had told everyone I convinced my buds to come over, in the PC fog. So everyone was there, waiting, praying for arrival. And I'm pretty sure I kissed the dock when I got off. So we were crossing, and the funniest part was I think before I went, or I think I spoke to him on the phone, and crossing that shipping channel, it's almost eerie because it just takes a tug or any boat with, even if they had radar, we didn't. So they would just crush us. And there's plenty of 36-foot contenders that just fly around at 50 knots. So the shipping channel with a freighter was just, he had no visibility, literally 20 yards. But he had just told me a story too about this tug was pulling this barge, and a center console was going through it, and a guy got from the cable, he got completely decapitated because he rode between the barge and the tug. So he just told me that story. I'm like, it's the last thing I want to hear. But when we did arrive, it was a celebration that
And how was the fishing?
I don't remember. It's probably pretty good. He always convinced us to go over. But there's another time where he convinced me to come over, and I was going to take the whaler, and he's like, dude, I can see from my window. It's the bay's it's only 3 or 4 feet, but I'm looking at my app and it's saying 5 feet. And I last second I went to my bud Mike's house to pick up some eels. I borrowed some eels from him to go as the shop was closed, and I was going to jump in the whaler, and he looked at me. He's like, dude, don't do it. Take the Seahorse. So I jumped on the Seahorse, which is probably a 50-foot. It's a second ferry. It's much smaller than the ferry. It's a water taxi, and that boat is 50 feet. And once we left New Bedford, so that's right down the street here. Once we got out in the bay, this is a 50-foot water taxi. This thing was just up and over, boom, like prop wash, you can just hear a complete inboard of the shaft and the propeller. So I took a video, and I was like, nice, he wanted me to come over at 18 foot and say, it'd be okay. That's usually Kobe's demeanor. It'd be fine,
Well, one of the things I was interested to learn is that I know you grew up here in New Bedford, right? It's the biggest fishing port here on the East Coast, and you had spent some time as a teenager with John Nato,
Yeah.
commercial fishing guy.
Yeah.
And you went out and spent time in the water with
Yeah,
him.
he's sort of my mentor.
How old were you?
It's like late teens.
Okay.
Mid-teens. Probably the best fisherman I've ever met personally in my life. I always feel like some part of fishing just has a natural knack. It doesn't matter what you read or how much time you spend. Like, you gotta have the touch. And yeah, we used to just everything. I still remember like wireline, like snapping wireline with him with bucktails, same size, everything. And you just be side by side, and just how many more giant fish that man could catch. But he taught me a lot. He taught me a lot of things, just fishing growing up. And it was just those small details. To this day, when he got a bucktail in his boat, and I carried a lot of this over the surf. Each time he got it in or got a fish, he would separate the amount of hairs to make it even, because he always thought that like if the hair on the bucktail wasn't separated even. Now, would it matter if the fish are just stacked up? Maybe not. But I'm telling you, for every one of my fish on one gunnel, he had probably gotten 6 over 40 pounds. So it was just mind-boggling. And he did a lot of trolling plugs too, so I learned a lot.
So those are the bigger, wider ones, right? We have a lip. The trollers.
The trolling plugs. Yep. So there'd be a trolling plug. So there's plenty of. So there's just be a troller, and they're bigger than this.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's just similar to that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when I was
big
younger.
shoulders on that.
Yeah, and I learned color matters because say he had a 26-foot black watch, just an incredible fisherman. He still fishes, just he does a lot more fly fishing now. And he used to, same thing, you have an 8-foot wide beam, and he'd have a bin, and there'd just be Gibbs Danny's trollers, and he'd spray paint them, just spray bomb them. And it'd be wireline on Sound Pigs Reef, and he'd be right there, and I'd be here, and it'd work in my favor sometimes too. Same distance out, you'd have your wire, say you had a 100-foot top shot of wire, and then your Dacron. So you can actually see your knot, and you're only a couple feet above the water. So he'd have out a brown, like a brown over white belly troller, same plug. It's just a standard Gibbs troller, and I would have out a yellow. The brown one, he would just keep catching on the brown, and then we'd swap, and then I would start catching more. So even though you're only 8 feet apart, and you bring these schools, and you're 17 to 18 feet down, and these plugs are getting down there just with a wire and it being a troller. But you're just 8 feet apart, and that school of fish is still selecting the brown. Oh, yeah. I mean, you're catching on the yellow, but it's clearly out fishing the yellow. And there'd be nights where it's white, but just to see a little distinction
between. Was it all nights?
Mostly nights if you're going plugs, like bucktails would be during the day. Yeah. He's just, Kobe knows me. He's just an incredible fisherman. Yeah. He's just got that natural knack. I've started a couple seminars long ago with, he always told me, he's like, Frank, bass are goofy. And I always every time something weird happens, I think of that. I'm like, bass are goofy. But he also used to, when I was growing up, he'd say, Roddy, the rod holder, was the best fisherman on the boat. So if I touched anything, it's what is that?
The idea of the turning to. It's when your lure, fly, whatever's out there, and maybe just dangling the current, and you're turning to think about what plug you might put on next, or check your phone, and whatever, you turn your hips, and that little, you'll get a hit. It's something. And the other thing that Kobe mentioned was in talking about how you kind of look at things. Every day is a clean slate, right? Because the water condition, the sea condition could be different. You might have had success a couple days in a row, but next night's not for sure. And there's if you have some part of your morning routine tells you might end up walking away from what was pretty good a couple of times. Is that?
I'm also stubborn too.
No kidding.
Yeah. Stubborn in the sense where if it makes sense in my brain and it doesn't work out, I'll make an imaginary excuse to go back to at least check. So it'd be a clean slate in that sense. And maybe I won't, invest as much time, but I almost.
Do you keep a log?
Yeah, I do keep a log. Yeah,
but
ever since 2010.
You should read it for fun, right?
Yeah, it's more memory based. It's just a million great stories, a million great nights.
Yeah.
But I don't really. It's not relative to fishing. It wouldn't matter if it's on the night. If I'm fishing every night, it's always something I want to say too. It doesn't matter how long I fish. If I stop for a couple of years, if you're not actively fishing 3, 4, 5, 6 nights a week, it doesn't matter how many years you invested previously, or because the typical old person saying is, "Oh, I've been fishing for 30 years." That doesn't matter if you've only been fishing, twice a month for 30 years versus a kid that's actively out there fishing. And it just seems that a lot of younger kids they grind it out, and that just doesn't matter what, if I sit there and tell them stories about, how like, down here is way better. No, down there was way better 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So they're going to know that because they're actively fishing and grinding it out every night. And it's almost better not knowing that stuff. You wish you could remove it from your brain so you do come in with
a kid who works at the shop, Kai, you got to know Kai.
Yep.
I asked him if he kept a log, and he said something like, I'd rather not be burdened by the past.
Oh, right? There we go.
Like, that's something like 70 or 80-year-old Kenny Abrams would say. It was really a bomb. I thought it was a really cool way to think about things.
Yeah, it's good. Again, it's good for the memory stuff. Like like if I read back something, or I do it with photos. Sometimes
look at your phone.
Yeah, I don't really use that. I'll use a camera if I'm ever going to take a photo of a fish like on my belt. But I'll use my phone, and it would just be a horrible red light. And it's just because I just need to see a speck of that fish or that plug. And I have a really good memory. So 4 years from now, I can look at it, and then it'll jog my memory. Or maybe some funny banter between me and my bud, or the incredible fishing on that night, or how horrible it was.
Right.
So it'd be more memory-based than if you start, you will start to be burdened by the past if you start to live and die by a law.
Yeah, and you won't get there through reason. It won't be, this tide, this place, last 5 years.
On the day, because now you have tides that aren't the same every month. Yeah. So it'd be more relevant to, it's 3 days before the moon, and I start to realize in the summer, I like it like a couple hours dark already before I go out. In the spring, it doesn't matter. But the previous year, if that tide is now much further up, because the moon's later in the month, it's completely irrelevant to know you did well on the 9th. It's not irrelevant.
No, I got you.
But it's...
they have to right-size it to the...
They have to circulate or change.
Yeah. So let's change gears here. I want to ask you a couple questions I ask most all the guests. What would be if someone wanted to get better at surf casting, or I think I want to ask. I don't want to couch this question too much. What would be 2 lures you'd suggest somebody might particularly put some time into to get to like they're valuable in your lineup? And geez, without this, this one's worth. If you don't fish this style of plug, give it a try because
a needlefish. Yeah, and I think it's the hardest to fish, but not so much. I live by this, and this stemmed from Rhode Island. I think back often, all the time, about like old John Habs days. I used to be fascinated with Rhode Island, even though I fished here. So a lot of like what I would do is, there's Rudy from the shop, and when Robbie Taylor surf fished and stuff, and John Habs was still with us. There was so many big fish caught in Rhode Island, and Habs was just, I think they were $17. They're just hard to get. I think M&D's got them, and you got them, and the second you got them, they're just sold out. And I remember getting my first one, and it's a hard plug to fish, but I live by needlefish more so than darters, but both. A needlefish and a darter, I think, will account for the most large fish there is. And I think more so needlefish, more like the 52 to 60 caliber pound fish that are caught on a wooden lure. It comes on a needlefish. A darter would be a close second. So I feel a darter's going to swim for you, and you're going to catch on it. And a metal lip's a little more frustrating. It's a little more rewarding, but it's a little more frustrating because it's harder to keep fish pinned on them. But I feel like even seasoned surfcasters, like a needlefish is a little bit tougher because in their brain it doesn't do anything. A needlefish swims despite what the shape is, whether you have the little notch in it like a John Habs, and it's a part of someone once said it just had to do that with like the lateral lines, but they generally do swim. But again, you feel no resistance, so you just feel like you're just bringing in a stick. And a lot of people say, hey, dead slow. The slower, like if you're not reeling it, there's an old saying,
slow and slow.
Or if you think you're not reeling it slow enough, reel slower, or something along those lines. But I've had great nights on Cuddy Hung. I'm just burning them, and I learned that's.
And what does it make? What makes it perform? What's your thought on why it performs so well? Because I know there's I look at the Super Strike wall, and they float. They're the various side lengths. They float. They sink. So it covers a lot of the water column.
And it just I was talking to someone last night, and they were talking about a particular spot down by your way that's still having needlefish, and we have. So I think they're prevalent everywhere. So that's good. And
the bait itself.
Yeah, and I used to think they were only out in the fall, but they're here all season. And again, they're not doing much. And I think a fish will always, even if it's not, a slimmer profile just matches everything. So even if it's not replicating a a needlefish. It still looks like a silver side or a mama chug. Like it just represents something moving.
But the other thing is, if they're opportunistic, and it creates the sound that makes them curious about what might be around, and then they see something that looks realistic. It might not be the black sea bass I thought that was going to be. You know what I mean? But they're still going to move on it.
And they're further enough away by the time they actually make they pounce it, and they make a serious approach at it from 4 feet. They still, even regardless of what their eyesight is, you can never say for certain, but even 4 feet away, 5 feet away, they can't fully make it out.
Correct.
If they did, they would certainly choose not to with giant hooks hanging from it. But by the time they make that, it's just a slim profile, so it's just going to replicate most stuff. And I just find anything slimmer is going to work. So I'd certainly say a needlefish, because if you can gain confidence in that, I feel like I know a lot of seasoned surfcasters that still say like, oh, I have a hard time catching on needles. But when most of those guys finally cave in and just stick with it and learn, because it's hard to learn when you don't feel anything, you're not getting any feedback from the plug, you're not feeling a nice thump, you don't know if you got a strand of weed on it. But it takes those first few fish to actually gain the confidence in it. And once you do, you start to just realize those fish are a lot more significant in size than, it just seems if you took 100 fish that were on needlefish, you'd get the larger of the fish than you would if you did another plug. So I always say a needlefish would account for the largest, but it takes a little more time to gain confidence in it.
Yeah, first zero in a needlefish. I always feel like
a lot of folks don't, but the folks that do fish them catch like a lot of the larger fish caught on artificials. So I'd say a needlefish, because then anything else becomes easier. But on that, I wouldn't stick to the whole slow retrieve. Again, the slow retrieve is going to be how you would start your night, like 8 out of 10 times. But I remember a night on Cuddy Hunk, and I was in the West End, and this is years back. I didn't know much about the place, but I was with a bud on a rock, and just getting frustrated. My cat, and just getting frustrated. I think my back hurt, and I was fishing a ton of nights. So I was getting halfway in, and where I thought was outside the strike zone, I'd start to burn my needlefish back just to make another cast. And I just got crushed, like 25-pound fish. So I'm like, no way, it's just by chance. So I threw it out further, and I just started burning it back. The same retrieve, I burned my plug back and my rod tip down to retrieve, and I got another 25-pound fish. So I was sharing a rock with my buddy. I told him to do the same thing, and he got fish by only burning it. But we were sitting there for, 40, 50 minutes, slow retrieving our needlefish. We didn't get, not even a tail slap. And then we started to burn him. So to go out and just, if you're going to, needlefish or any plug, to just live by, I think it's gospel to whatever you read, some literature. It doesn't mean burn it back one night, burn any plug back one night, I throw it up in the sky, like let it make a big splash, it's just don't take anything you read, any sort of literature as gospel. But that particular night, and that's a plug that, is known to be fished on the slowest retrieve possible. And this night I couldn't burn it fast enough.
Any thoughts on size you like, or weight you like, or there's so many needlefish out there?
I don't own a slow singing needlefish. I don't like them. I've never liked them. Guys like them in a boulder field. I've just never done well enough on them, and I know guys have. So I just like to go with a extremely slow sink needlefish. It's still going to sink. And sometimes that needlefish won't sink, because now if you have a sweep, it's going to rise up on the surface. And I like something that sinks slightly tail down, like a 10 or 20%, and 20%. And it's good if you tag bottom, because now when you actually retrieve it and you tag bottom, you're not burying it in the bottom if it was a level sink plug. And in my preference, I don't like stubby short needlefish. I've just never done well on them unless I'm, kind of just that's a pile of smaller fish. Or
it seems to me to be a lure built to solve a problem, to get distance. Not really what it might do once it gets in.
I believe there's jointy needlefish out there. I don't mess with that. I generally just fish I prefer like a musa wad style needlefish. But there's so many variations that make so many, needlefish different from each other.
It's hard to make it.
So then you could have, then you could have 5 different ones, and they all fish differently, but they all work. And
that's
they're
cool.
just,
one thing would be to investigate the needlefish. The other one I heard was the darter.
The darter too. It's just undeniably, it's like an underwater spook. I feel like fish miss it sometimes, because it's not swimming in a rhythm like, say, a metal lip. It's not just thumping where you can't miss, where it's kind of like a spook. You zigzag and much wider walk the dog than a pencil popper. So sometimes fish, they calculate further there and they miss. So with the darter, sometimes you do miss because it's darting underwater and it's not in a rhythm or a tight pattern or a tight swim. But from all along the coast. I mean, they've just been productive for however, even if you look at a super strike, it doesn't do much, especially when you add heavier hardware like I was talking about. You get the slowest little wiggle almost that some needlefish get, but it's productive again and again, almost all the way up the coast, wherever bass are hanging in, resident fish or migrating fish. Wherever they are, it's clearly replicating something they like. And if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
But then you could experiment with tons of different darters out there. A little wider.
You just showed me that wider one more. I can see immediately.
That's a happy medium.
How that would solve that.
There's
digs better and helps you straighten out.
There's some plugs that are just built better out of wood, and some plugs that are just built better out of plastic. Touched on a little neck popper, Polaris popper, or original was Gibbs. I still think a Super Strike is up there, and I think it's because of that drop back, and it sinks, but it still casts well and pops extremely well and stays on the surface, but it's really hard to replicate that out of wood. Same thing on other plugs. I feel they're just much better in wood than they are in plastic, and one of those would be a darter, like
much better in wood than plastic.
Yeah, it's just buoyant. There's no weight in it. It's much more lively. Whereas a plastic one doesn't swim as well. But in terms of a Super Strike, it just solves a problem. Like it's not going to get the action, but you get the distance. It has a perfect slither, and it's just very consistent. It has a little slither. And I think with the old stock hooks when they first came out were much lighter. The old mustads, I think they're nickel or tin coated nickel. So those plugs just swim a bit wider. It's already a pretty narrow plug, and so the slope's not going to get as much resistance. But if I feel like everything would become easier after the needlefish. But I'd go needlefish and dart. If I can only have two plugs, and the irony in that is my favorite thing to catch on is metal lips. It's just you feel a little old school. You feel, but needlefish and darter.
All right. What are 2 tips you might suggest for folks to improve? I mean, having talked to you over time, and especially hearing a talk last night and your comments today, it certainly seems you're a big fan of the game plan.
Yeah, I think preparation too.
Yeah, that's right. That's the right word.
Life's busy. I get that. I just written something recently about that. If you're getting to a spot already late, and then you before you left, you're packing up and your gear's all over the place, and you get there and you're that guy spending 50 minutes, getting ready, on the side of a road in the dark versus a guy who's, done in 8 minutes, ready to go. It's going to be a giant difference. Same thing if you get to the water and you pull out your plug and, this one has a rusty hook, so now you're not even fishing the plug you wanted to fish with. So you have to, this plug, it's completely trashed.
How much time do you spend down here?
Not much, actually. I spend a lot in the winter because I'll build in there.
Yeah.
And but season-wise, I just pop down in between work around lunch, and I'll leaders.
Freshen things up. For
and a lot of everything I do is outside. I have just outside tables. So that's another thing. When I come home, when I get here, I am in my bed I'm in 8 minutes. So everything outside, my boots, my wetsuit, my waders, my jackets, my socks, everything gets a quick wash, and it's perfect, and it's hung on hooks outside, all in the same order. In the yard. So it's, 2 feet from the driveway, and so everything gets a rinse, and then everything's packed the same way, like in the same order. I'm going to take it out the next night in a tow, and my gear's washed. I run down my rod, and I jump in the shower, and I'm in bed in 8 minutes. So you do that before and after fishing. Now if you're going out for 5 hours, if you have 5 hours, you're fishing more of the 5 hours than you would if you're dilly-dallying forever, or the next night you didn't wash your gear or have some sort of system. The next night, if you're looking for, your boots are filled with sand, your waders. So same thing, but you don't have to spend much time. If you just feel like a little system, choose away all the time that you're not actively fishing, if you will.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Well, I have one last question. And thanks, Frank. Thanks a bunch. You have one.
Got it done.
One day.
It's been a while.
That's right. But we stick with it. One day left to fish. Where are you fishing, and what are you fishing for?
I'd have to go bass, just because it's the last day I could fish.
Yeah, maybe you don't have to tell me exactly. I'm not looking for exactly.
I'd go Cuddy Hunk.
All right.
It could be October. It could be February. But as long as my last cast is there, I'm happy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks a bunch. This is great. You take care, man.
Peter, thanks for having me.
You betcha.